Hello, everybody. I hope you're well. So today I'm going to offer a mini talk, I guess, on different types of sources. So one of the big things we think about when we're doing research in the library or on Google is what kind of source we're looking at and how do we evaluate it. With the proliferation of internet research and the access to different kinds of sources, you even hear this in the news, the need to kind of evaluate what we're looking at. Well, at the university level, we think about two big types of sources, scholarly versus non-scholarly sources. So I'm going to talk through this handout and how to evaluate sources. And then in my second video, I will do a how to locate good sources in the library. Because there's a lot of components to locating strong sources, and it really involves a lot of thinking. But first, some explanations. So this is a handout you all have access to. And I'm going to start with what scholarly sources are and what non-scholarly sources are as well. So let's start with non-scholarly. Non-scholarly, some examples down here, is pretty much all normal texts that a non-academic person would read. So non-scholarly articles or texts include magazine articles, news articles, blogs, encyclopedias, textbooks, fiction, speeches, almost everything that we engage with as a text in the public realm is non-scholarly. Non-scholarly sources are not bad sources. They just require you to do a lot more critical analysis of what you're looking at and its credibility. I'll come back to that. In the university, we think of scholarly sources as the kind of sources that represent research happening at the university level. So a scholarly source, this is almost a synonym for scholarly source, is peer-reviewed. This is the big feature of a scholarly source. They are peer-reviewed by other scholars in the same research area, often in the same sub-research area. So not just psychologists in general looking at it, but somebody who's in the exact same small niche and area that you're working in is reading your work and saying that this meets our disciplinary expectations for methods and methodologies for how the research is being approached, and for the findings meet our basic expectations as a field. This is a very high level of source. Some features of them are that they cite credible, authoritative sources, often a lot of them. They participate in a larger ongoing conversation on the topic, and this conversation is usually referenced and evident in the essay itself. So what that means is a scholarly source is going to say, scholars have done work on this and found A and they've found B, and we're going to replicate their work, or we are drawing on that work but going in a different direction, right? So it's referencing, this is almost like also a literature review. It's referencing what others have found in relationship to this specific topic. Another important feature is that they always properly cite their sources, including a work's references, a bibliography, and some form of in-text citations. They may do it differently, but depending on disciplinary conventions. But there's going to be both something at the end that lists them and something inside of the text that gives you page numbers or years and authors' names. And this is another part of scholarly sources that's a little bit less discussed but equally important, is scholarly sources often present information as negotiable or current findings. Even when a scholarly article is arguing for one way of looking at things, they'll still acknowledge that there are other ways of looking at that knowledge is evolving and that we grow and learn as disciplines, right? So even though they may be advocating for one thing, they may, for example, offer a set of limitations. Why was their study or research limited? What did they not consider that other people need to consider? And that's a lot of people think of this as wishy-washy qualifying in the public sphere. But in the scholarly field at the university level, differences matter, contexts matter, and anything that's going to change your results matters, right? And just the historical nature of knowledge matters, that as we find out new discoveries in different fields, previous understandings are no longer accurate, right? And so scholarly sources tend to make various nods in the writing towards the limited nature of their work, different perspectives on it, and that essentially what they're saying is probably not the one end-all be-all truth or fact, because we don't typically think of knowledge that way at the university level. So where do we find scholarly sources? This comes up to some definitions. So there's two big things I think of that are important for a library research. One is a academic journal. An academic journal is it's a lot like an academic magazine. They come out anywhere from 2 to 4 or 6 times a year. And all of the articles in them have been peer-reviewed by scholars in that field. So each field has its own, and even specialties within fields have their own set of journals. And then e-journals, we'll often see libraries use this term. It just means that that journal has a digital copy that's available online. Most journals today are some form of electronic journal. And this other term, this is essential for navigating a library. A database, I think of them as a digital container of materials. And the library has a bunch of different databases. So EBSCOhost is a database. JSTOR is a database. And these are boxes that subscribe to specific types of texts or research. We even have databases that are news articles, historical information. There are databases of pictures. There are also public databases. So I'm thinking about the Flickr and things like that that host tons of pictures. Those are a kind of database too. So I'm going to go to the library and show you these two things in action and how to find a scholarly source. Back down here, scholarly sources include articles in databases, articles in scholarly journals. Those are the same things. And then sometimes books, usually published by university presses, or anthologies include collections of essays on a specific topic that are peer-reviewed. These are the types of scholarly works you're typically going to find in a library. And it's important to just kind of be aware of what you're looking for and what all of these names are, because it's an important part of kind of information literacy. Okay, so if we shift over to the Cornell Library, since we've been doing a course on bridging differences, and we've talked a lot about race, and we've also talked a lot about listening. So I just put listening and racism into the box in the main library and I hit search. So I'm going to get into in my second video how to do this searching better. But for the moment, I just want you to know about scholarly sources and how to find them. So over here, peer-reviewed is going to give you scholarly sources. So here we see it as peer-reviewed. And when we scroll through these lists, academic journal, academic journal, academic journal, this is the generic genre that this source is in. And because I clicked peer-reviewed over here, it's only going to give me scholarly sources. So those would be academic journal. If I unclick this, it'll update my search. slowly but surely. And you'll see you get a little bit of everything. Academic journals will probably be the main thing because we're in a university library, but you're going to get news. Here we have a periodical, and this is a nice word for some sort of regular publication. A magazine could be a periodical. Technically, an academic journal could also be a periodical, but it's a broader category. So we still do get a lot of academic journals, but we also get some news. So this is, again, this icon here is the generic genre that these things are in. But the specific academic journal is here. And often with an academic essay, a peer-reviewed journal article, you're going to see the title of the journal is going to be in italics. So this is Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought. And you're going to see something about the volume, issue, and year, and then the page numbers. So this format is very common primarily for academic journals. You might see this in the news. You're going to see some date information, but when you see volume and issue numbers along with, some reference to fall, spring, winter, usually that's an indication that it's probably an academic journal. Now, I'm going all through all of this because it's very important to kind of know what you're looking for. Often, not always, but often, the journal title will tell you a sense of the field. So dialectical anthropology. I don't know much about this source, but I know it's coming from anthropology. Down here, critical ethnic studies. So this is looking at, you can also kind of get this from the subjects that they give you here, but often the title will also give you a clue as to what you're looking at. So I want to look at two examples. This is actually in my browser. So if I clicked on one of these, like this, that's not the one I clicked on. This is what it's going to look like in a browser for a scholarly journal article. So we see the Journal of Society for American Music. This is the title of the journal. This up here, Cambridge University Press, is the publishing press. And I'm not sure, I've never heard of Cambridge Core, but usually there's some reference to a database. And you kind of have to be careful because the database, the bigger bucket or container that the journals you're looking at are inside of in the online space can be confused with the journal title itself. But the journal title itself is going to give you very specific information. It's going to give you a sense of disciplinarity. What discipline is this coming from? Also, often it will have journal in the title, right? Okay, so this is this article, a specific type of listening in a specific context. And this is not the full thing. This is just the abstract. So you also have to be careful that you're looking at the full article. But you're also going to see all of these sources in a scholarly journal article. The second view is if you look at a PDF. And I wanted to show you two because I wanted you to see that the journal itself is going to look different depending on what journal it is. So this is Gender, Work, and Organization. And it's always going to be up here. And usually this will be followed, the title of the journal will be followed with the volume and issue number as well as the date, right? So, and then if we scroll all the way down, you can tell this is scholarly. It's long, it's substantial. It uses in-text citations. And at the bottom, there are full text citations. Okay, so just know that you kind of have to do some looking. I often see students mistake the journal and the database. I think this is the database in this case. So you really want to make sure you know what the journal is, what the database is, and what you're kind of looking at, making sure it's a scholarly source. I want to talk through one more part of this handout, but first I want to acknowledge that non-scholarly sources are not bad. You just have to evaluate them differently. So on the second page of the handout, I've given you a couple of questions for how to evaluate sources. And this is a lot, right? There's a lot of questions you have to ask, but some of them are more applicable for scholarly articles, and some of them are more applicable to non-scholarly sources. So I'm going to quickly talk through these, but these should help you analyze, am I looking at a good source or not? So author, publication, and reputation. Can you identify the authors and publication? Google both. What information comes up? Are they credible? So if you're looking at a scholarly source, you can assume it is credible if you can identify the scholarly source. So this is a set of questions that's really more geared towards non-scholarly sources. Often on the internet, we see things in which you cannot identify an author. And sometimes that's okay if you're talking about a government website, but most of the time you want to see an author's name. Publication date and relevance. This is important for both scholarly and non-scholarly sources. So both of them, you just want to make sure you're not looking at something that's older or less relevant today. Use of evidence, this is more geared towards non-scholarly sources. In a scholarly source, you want to be aware of what evidence the writer is drawing on, but it's less essential. This is more important for non-scholarly stuff that you're finding on the internet. Are they drawing on evidence that is credible? Can you trace and find their evidence? Is it real evidence, right? This is something that's important for non-scholarly sources too. Most of the time you're going to see this happening in a scholarly source, but it's useful to kind of trace the thinking. How many perspectives does the author present? What are the challenges to their own work? It's also a check and balance kind of question for a non-scholarly internet source, in the sense that do they present other perspectives? Are they making an argument for something specific and then not acknowledging complicating perspectives on that? That weakens the credibility of a particular source, right? Acknowledging alternative stakeholders and perspectives is something that's only going to strengthen your argument. Okay, these last three are what I think of as the most important questions you can ask when you're looking at a scholarly source. So first of all, publication genre and purpose. So we know it's a scholarly article if it's in an academic journal that is peer-reviewed, and we found it in the library. But knowing the specific journal title can be super useful when you're talking about scholarly articles. So I already kind of mentioned that. But these last two are super important evaluation criteria. So we can find any old scholarly article on the internet, but can we read it? Can you access it? Is it too dense? Is it too full of jargon? Is it too difficult? If that's true, it's not a good choice for you. Yes, there is a lot of scholarly work that's important that involves a lot of jargon. But for your purposes, you need to be able to read enough of it and understand enough of it to write about it. So if you can't, put it back. There are plenty that you can, I promise. That doesn't mean that you won't have to work a little bit to get through a scholarly article. It just means you need to pick one that you can work through. There's varying levels of that at the academic level. And then that final question is connection to your purpose. So maybe you found a great scholarly article that fits within our class theme, that is readable and relevant, but it doesn't relate to your specific purpose for your essay. How are you going to use it? What ways are you going to draw on it? You need to be able to skim an article and figure out, how will this add to my own project? How will I use it? How will it help me, right? And if you can't answer that, it might not be the best source for you. So this is a lot to think through, but it's really important work. to be evaluating sources in this way. And I would just say that when we're doing library research, something that's super important is we need to build in time for research, because almost always, in order to find one really strong source that is readable and that's perfect for our purpose, we often need to locate and kind of skim through, I don't know, 5 to 10, right? You need to find more sources, evaluate them, and then narrow it down to the best one for what you're doing. So that is why research is a lot of work and time consuming, and it's hard. But having some of these questions and thinking through what you're looking at and how it will relate to your own project are a great starting